Have you ever suddenly woken up at 2 a.m. heart racing, thoughts spinning, like something was pulling at your soul, but you couldn't explain it? What if I told you that wasn't just a random moment? Kathryn Kuhlman knew exactly what was happening. Because at 2 a.m., while the world is asleep, the spiritual world is at war. And if you're awake, you've just stepped into a battlefield you didn't even know existed at 2 a.m. Most of the world is silent. The streets are empty, the lights dimmed, and nearly every home has fallen into a deep sleep. But while the physical world rests, the spiritual realm is wide awake. It is during these hidden hours of the night that something powerful and often unseen begins to stir. Many don't realize it, but 2 a.m. marks a shift, a moment in time when light and darkness seem to collide in a quiet but intense war. It's not something you hear about in the news or see on your phone screen. This battle doesn't take place on the ground with weapons you can touch. It happens in rooms filled with tears, in hearts burdened with pain, in minds that can't sleep because of the weight they carry. At 2 a.m., there's a war for your peace, your purpose, your destiny. Some call it insomnia. Some call it overthinking. But what if it's more than that? What if it's the moment heaven is knocking, and hell is too? Kathryn Kuhlman understood this in a way few others did. She didn't see 2 a.m. as a random hour. She saw it as sacred ground. She believed something unique happens in the silence when the world sleeps, but the spirit wakes. There's a reason why so many people feel the urge to cry during the night, or suddenly feel a strange pressure pressing against their soul. It's not coincidence, it's spiritual. The battles people fight in the daytime often begin in the night. Some of the deepest fears, temptations, and doubts come creeping in when the world is quiet. That's when you remember what they said. That's when the loneliness feels louder. That's when regrets start replaying like a broken record. And for some, that's the moment they feel like giving up. But that's also the hour when something divine is closest, a whisper, a nudge, a pull, something calling you higher if you're willing to listen. You see, darkness doesn't own the night. It just pretends it does, and that's where the war begins. The enemy uses silence to magnify fear, but the Spirit uses silence to reveal truth. That's why 2 a.m. isn't just a battleground, it's an invitation. An invitation to stand up in the dark and say, "Not tonight." An invitation to push back against the weight even when you don't feel strong. An invitation to fight for your family, your mind, your peace, not with shouting or noise, but with stillness and surrender. Kathryn knew this because she lived it. She would often wake in the early hours, not because she couldn't sleep, but because something greater called her out of it. And when she responded, things happened. Not always fireworks, not always immediate change, but something shifted, peace returned, clarity came, miracles followed, not because of how loud she prayed, but because she showed up. And in the middle of the night, that's often all it takes. Show up, speak softly, be still, and stay open. We often think the battles in life are won by noise, by doing more, saying more, fighting harder. But in the spiritual war at 2 a.m., the opposite is often true. The ones who win are the ones who are willing to wait, to watch, and to weep if they must. It's not a glamorous war. There's no spotlight, no audience, no applause, but it's real and it matters. You might wonder why 2 a.m. feels heavier, why it feels like time moves slower, why your chest gets tighter or your thoughts more chaotic. That's the spiritual tension rising, the moment your spirit senses a fight coming or a breakthrough near. It's often the final push before a new day begins. And the ones who learn how to lean into that hour instead of running from it, they discover something the rest of the world misses. So if you find yourself awake when no one else is, maybe it's not an accident, maybe it's a calling. Maybe you're meant to stand in the gap for someone else. Maybe you're meant to receive an answer that's only whispered at 2 a.m. Or maybe you're simply being reminded that even in your darkest hour, you are not alone. Because in the silence, something is happening. Kathryn Kuhlman's secret wasn't in her words or her stage presence. It wasn't in the large auditoriums or the emotional music that played when miracles broke out. Her true power was hidden often when no one was watching, and one of her most sacred secrets was what she did while the world slept. At 2 a.m., while others turned over in their beds or scrolled through their phones, she was on her knees. Not because she had to be, but because her spirit was drawn there. There was a stillness in the air that could not be explained, a spiritual alertness that awakened her long before the sun rose. For Kathryn, 2 a.m. wasn't an interruption. It was an invitation, a moment of holy awareness that something more was happening behind the scenes. She understood that when the heart is quiet, the soul becomes sensitive. That's when the whispers come. Not the kind you hear with your ears, but the kind you feel deep in your bones, the kind that shift your perspective and steady your shaking hands. What made Kathryn different wasn't her ability to perform miracles. It was her ability to be still, to be available, to respond to the invisible pull of the Spirit when no one else would notice. And it was in those 2 a.m. moments, fragile, raw, unfiltered, that heaven met earth. Not in thunder, not in lightning, but in the quiet surrender of one woman saying yes again and again. She didn't always pray with eloquence. Sometimes all she did was sit in silence. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she just listened, and yet the results were undeniable. Those private hours became the fuel for public miracles. What the world celebrated in daylight was made possible by what she surrendered in the dark. People often chase the results without understanding the roots. They want the anointing without the crushing. They want the clarity without the quiet. But Kathryn knew the power came in those lonely hours of prayer, long before the lights ever came on. She didn't wait until morning to seek answers. She went where few were willing to go, into the thick of the night, into the unseen, into the war zone where souls hang in the balance. Her secret wasn't mystical. It was faithful. She kept showing up. She didn't need a stage or spotlight. Her altar was a room filled with silence and surrender, and in that silence she discovered access to something few ever find: deep peace, divine instruction, and holy fire. You might think it takes years of training to walk in that kind of spiritual authority, but often it starts with a choice, a simple yes, a willingness to respond when you're stirred at 2 a.m., when your heart aches for something more, when you feel that weight pressing on your chest and you don't even know why. Kathryn never claimed to be extraordinary. What set her apart was that she paid attention when others dismissed the moment. She didn't silence that midnight nudge. She leaned into it. And because she did, generations were changed, bodies were healed, lives were transformed. The same invitation exists today. The question is, will you answer it? Most people never stop to ask what's really happening while they sleep. They assume the night is harmless, just hours ticking by until morning. But Kathryn Kuhlman didn't see it that way. She understood that the night, especially around 2 a.m., holds a weight most people overlook. It's not just a quiet time, it's a vulnerable one. That's when thoughts come unfiltered. That's when emotions surface without the distractions of the day. And for many, that's when the enemy does his most calculated work in the dark, in silence, when you're least prepared. It's during this time that doubt creeps in and begins whispering lies that you're not good enough, that you're forgotten, that nothing will ever change. It's the hour when anxiety wraps around the mind like a chain, when memories of past failures start to replay, and when temptation shows up dressed like comfort. And if you're not aware of what's really happening, you'll mistake these spiritual attacks as random emotions, and you'll try to fight with logic what must be confronted with spiritual awareness. Kathryn Kuhlman saw this pattern not just in her life, but in the lives of others. She knew the enemy doesn't always need a loud entrance. He moves in the quiet. He waits until the house is still and the lights are off. That's when he begins to sow confusion. Not all attacks come with fear and chaos. Some come gently, disguised as isolation. That's the strategy to make you feel like you're the only one awake, the only one feeling what you feel, the only one going through this invisible war. But she also knew something else, that in those very same hours, light is also present. The night doesn't just belong to darkness, and the silence isn't just a space for attacks. It's also a space where heaven can respond. But you have to be awake enough to recognize it. Kathryn didn't fight back with anger or frustration. She didn't argue with the voices. She simply created space for light to speak louder. That meant choosing to turn a restless night into a moment of sacred connection. Instead of letting worry run wild, she leaned into stillness. She let her awareness shift from fear to focus on what she knew to be true, not what the night tried to convince her of. Her secret was in knowing that not every heavy moment was meant to be avoided. Some were meant to be pressed into. Some were meant to reveal what was hiding underneath. She believed that even when the enemy launched attacks in the dark, there was always a higher purpose behind why she was being awakened. And rather than fight the discomfort, she responded to it. We've all had those nights where sleep is impossible and the mind races without direction, where peace feels out of reach and nothing makes sense. What Kathryn teaches us is that those moments might not be random. They might be spiritual signals, alarms going off in a realm we can't see alerting us that something is happening and we're being invited to participate. You don't need to be afraid of the night. You don't need to dread 2 a.m., but you do need to be awake to what's at stake, because the enemy is active. He knows that when the world sleeps, your guard might be down, and he'll use that moment to plant fear, doubt, comparison, and restlessness. But there's power in being aware. There's victory in choosing to stay connected, even when it's inconvenient. Kathryn's life proves this. She didn't rise in power because of what she did in public. She rose because of how she fought in private. And some of her most important battles were won at 2 a.m. when no one saw, when no one applauded, when no one understood why she kept showing up in the dark. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the right words. You just have to be present, because sometimes being awake at 2 a.m. isn't a problem, it's your purpose.